You ever seen that meme on Facebook? Hang in there, dads, Christmas is coming. Pictures of socks with holes blown in them, and jeans and shirts and undergarments and all kinds of stuff that dads sacrifice throughout the year. And the Christmas gift that dad always gets every year is socks and clothes and undergarments and all stuff like that. You know, poor dad has to wait till Christmas to get all of these things, right? Oh, it's the dad sacrifice, you know. When I was a kid, my dad always, every year, unequivocally got socks. Every year. I always wondered why. It was because my dad would not buy anything for himself. He would make sure that we had what we needed first, and then he would take if there were any left over. Many dads sacrifice quite a bit for their families. Moms are sitting there in a room going, hey, what about us? What's the mom sacrifice? Pull it up. Scotty, you bring up the next one. That's the mom sacrifice. Right. Because inevitably she's got like 8 arms. She's like an octopus. You know, she's got like 8 arms. She's trying to dust and cook and clean and pay bills and walk the dog who doesn't want to be walked, and the kid who's hanging on to the leg crying and trying to read and study for this, you know, book for education that she's going through, and trying to vacuum and do work at the same time. Yeah, that's the mom sacrifice. They sacrifice sanity, right? Pardon me. They sacrifice quiet time. They sacrifice a conversation. There are times they'd love to have a conversation with someone older than the age of 12. A mature conversation with somebody who is an adult. They sacrifice baths and showers alone, because inevitably mom goes into the shower. Mom, I'm hungry. Your dad is sitting right there in the living room, right next to the kitchen. Go ask him. Yeah, you were that kid. You were that kid. We've been going through this sermon series called Imitators. And we've talked about the ancient faith. We've talked about idolatry. Last week we talked about how it is about humility and not pride. This week we are going to talk about the idea and the concept of sacrifice. And today it is a kind of a 2-part kind of thing, because sacrifice doesn't just stand alone. It gets coupled with something, and next week is what it gets coupled with. But for this week, we're going to talk about the idea of sacrifice, and we're going to be in 1 Corinthians 10. I mean, 1 Corinthians 10 all morning. It is a chapter long. The first 13 verses read like this. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now these things happened as examples for us, so we would not crave the evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us try the Lord, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the end of ages has come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. There's that pride factor. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. We are going through here in Corinthians, and Paul is addressing the Corinthian church because they've got problems. And he is urging these believers not to make the same mistakes that Israel made. Don't be unaware. Their fathers, Israel, were all under the cloud. They passed through the sea and were baptized into Moses. There's a whole comparison there with baptism, walking through the water. Israel, okay? They ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. They were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. But yet in verse 5 it says, nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. No, God was not pleased with them, as a matter of fact. Verse 6 goes on, he says, now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. You see, they craved, but were greedy. This harkens back to the book of Numbers, as a matter of fact. Numbers 11. Let me get there real quick. Numbers 11:4. And then verse 34. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and also the sons of Israel wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? God had brought them out. They had been provided manna, but they wanted meat. They wanted more. What they had was not good enough. They were greedy. They wanted meat, so God provided quail. Verse 34. So the name of that place was called Kibroth Hatava, because they were buried, because there they buried the people who had been greedy. What did God do? Struck them down. Yeah, because they're greedy. We want more, they said. We want more. Is that not the American condition? We want more. What we have is not good enough. We want more. Oh, how greed has overtaken our culture. Verse 7 in Corinthians, as we go back here, says, do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Yes, that word play means just what you think it does. It has sexual overtones to it. This harkens back to Exodus this time. Exodus 32, as a matter of fact. Exodus 32 is where Moses has gone up Mount Sinai. Okay? God has given him the law. God has given him instructions. God tells him he needs to go back down because they've already started to stray away. Chapter 32 of Exodus. Now when the people saw that Moses had delayed in coming down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Aaron has said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. Then all the people tore off all the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." I didn't know God was a cow. Now, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they rose early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Where'd they get it from? Egypt. God is not a cow. That calf did not lead them out of Egypt. Moses was up on the mountaintop for 40 days. Nary a sight or sound had been heard from him. They had no idea what happened to him. It records what happened to him. He was up on the mountain with God. Dare I say, Christ himself. The Trinity. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. Do not imitate the nations around you. Do not imitate the idolatry that surrounds you. And if we think we escape that today, we are sorely mistaken. Because as we pointed out a few weeks ago, idolatry has even crept in our prayer life. The question now remains, where else has it crept in? It's all over the place. Idolatry has crept in all over the place. The first place to look is wherever there's pride and arrogance. 8 to 10, go on. Says, "Nor let us act immorally as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us try the Lord as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer." You see, it's hearken, nor let us act immorally. Okay, so this harkens back to Exodus 20 or Numbers 25 in Peor, where Balaam, who was called to prophesy against Israel, actually blessed Israel, but yet taught Balak how to trip up the Israelites. Immorality. Nor try the Lord, it says in verse 9. That harkens back to Numbers 21:5, where they complained about the Lord's provision. The manna, the quail they were so greedy to ask for, they even started complaining about those. The Lord provides for you and you dare to grumble and complain about it? Verse 10, "Nor grumble as some of them did, and they were destroyed by the destroyer." This is Numbers 16, 41, 49, and yes, even harkens back to Exodus 12, 23. Does anybody know what that verse is? That's the plague of the firstborn, where if you are not covered by the blood of the Lamb, you are destroyed. If that is not a hearken to Revelation and the destroyer that's coming, I don't know what is. Because that day's coming. You see, all of these things we have a tendency in our culture to do. We are tripped up by the sexual immorality that invades everything about our culture. We complain about the Lord's provision. We get jealous for our neighbor because they have a quote unquote a better life than we do. Oh, the Facebook syndrome. We show everything that's great and good and nice, but what they don't see are the troubles lying underneath the surface. The grass is not always greener on the other side. There's a story of a man who he and his wife had been married for 25, 30 years. And he started noticing how his lovely bride 30 years ago had aged. She put on a little weight and stretch marks from babies and, time. She'd gotten older. And he left her for a younger woman, thinking the grass was greener on the other side, when in actuality, it really isn't. Because that younger woman then left him, and he in turn had nothing. Because the wife of his youth had moved on. The grass is not always greener on the other side. Verse 11. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. You see, all of these things happened to Israel as an example. Okay? These are all an example. Learn and avoid Israel's mistakes. All of these things that I have covered from Exodus and Numbers is going to be a part of our next sermon series, actually. The next sermon series is, funny enough, called Learn from Failure. And we're going to learn from the failure of Israel. I should say failures, plural, of Israel, because there's a lot of them. And I was going to go through the book of Exodus, but this story is bigger than the book of Exodus. It is an Old Testament. So we're going to do an Old Testament survey of Israel's mistakes in the next series, starting in September. Learn from the example of Israel's mistakes. Verse 12, watch out for pride. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. Pride comes before the fall. If you think you stand, be very careful, because you are about to fall flat on your face. Watch out for pride. Do not, in other words, do not think that you are better than Israel, because you're not. You are not better than Israel. Your righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees. And they had the law down. But Bill put a pretty fine point on it this morning, that it's not about keeping rules and regulations. This is a matter of the heart. You can keep all the rules and regulations. The Pharisees did. They kept all the rules and regulations. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. You tithe a tenth of all this stuff, but you've neglected justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You've neglected the weightier things. You've kept the law, but you've missed the point of the law. The point is the heart. And here's the thing. If our righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees, and they didn't measure up, they couldn't measure up, they didn't measure up on a performance and morality scale, then how in the world can we? You can't. Your righteousness is that of filthy rags. Christ is our righteousness. That only comes by faith. It only comes by faith. Watch out if you think you stand. Take heed that you might just fall, because you're no better than Israel. Verse 14 to 29. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. You judge what I say. Is not the cup of blessing which we share sharing in the blood of Christ? Is not the bread which we break sharing in the body of Christ? Since there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Look at the nation of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices sharers in the altar? What do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers in demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake in the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than he, are we? All things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. Eat anything that is sold in the meat market without asking questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all of it, and all it contains. If one of the unbelievers invites you and you want to go, eat anything that is set before you without asking questions for conscience sake. But if anyone says to you, this is meat sacrificed to idols, do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informed you and for conscience sake. I mean, not your own conscience, but the other man's. For why is my freedom judged by another's conscience? If I partake in thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that which I give thanks? He starts off this next section here by saying, after he warns them to avoid Israel's mistakes, what does he say? Flee idolatry. What is one of the things in the very first council that the apostles in Jerusalem wrote a letter for Paul to take back in Acts 15? It was idolatry stuff. Sexual immorality, sacrifice to idols, blood, strangled animals. All idolatry stuff. In other words, flee idolatry. Yeah, idolatry is much deeper than what we realize. 15 to 30 go on through these lessons from idol sacrifices. 15 to 22 makes a case that idol sacrifices are to demons. Did you ever think about that? Yeah. Spiritual world, little g gods, lesser gods. That's exactly what it is. They're sacrificing to a lesser god. It is to a demon. To someone who is not of God. Who is not God. You cannot drink of the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons at the same time. In other words, you either drink of the cup of the Lord or you drink of the cup of demons. He goes on in verses 23 to 29 and says to eat without asking for conscience sake. But if somebody points it out, refrain from eating. This is not just about meat sacrificed to idols, which on the surface level, yes it is. I get that. But this is so much more than just idol. Where's their temple that they sacrifice animals around here? We don't have to worry about meat sacrifice. We don't have to worry about this surface level issue because it's not an issue here. We don't have temples where we take animals to be slaughtered to sacrifice to a false god. We just don't. It's not a problem we have. But there's a deeper issue here in the fact that there is idolatry around us. 29 through the rest. Let me kind of back up to 29 and I'll read the rest of it. It says, I mean, not for your own conscience, but the other man's. For why is my freedom judged by another's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that for which I give thanks? Whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, so that they will be saved. You see, verse 23 and 24 sum it all up. All things are lawful, but not all things that are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. That's why he says, eat of the meat sacrificed in the temple, but don't ask for conscience sake. Don't ask. Don't worry about it. all things are given by God. He says it right there in 26. The earth is the Lord's, and all in it contains. And all it contains. Eat it. Don't ask. Eat it. It's okay. God has given us these things. It's all right. However, all things are lawful, but not everything is profitable. All things are lawful, but not everything edifies. Let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. This ain't about you. Don't use your freedom to make somebody else stumble. Do not use your freedom to make somebody else stumble. Let's bring this into a modern, current context. Seek the good of others, not yourself. I have a buddy who thinks it's a sin to eat pork or shellfish. I've got other friends who think that it's sinful to be to eat meat at all. They don't eat meat completely. They are completely vegetarian. We're not going to talk about these subjects. We don't talk about it. I don't eat it in front of them. I don't do these things. It's just not what we do because it's not about me. I'm not about to use my freedom to make somebody else stumble. Not going to do it. Will not do it. That's what your conscience is. I'm good. It's okay. No problem. How about a family member who is a recovering alcoholic? Are you really going to sit there and have a beer in front of them? No, you're not. No, you're not. Don't do that. I've got recovering alcoholics in my family. Sherry's got them in her family. You know, alcoholism runs very strong in her family. These are very real things. It's why I limit my alcohol consumption as a pastor, because there are people who would stumble if I did this. You know, if we had a restaurant in town, I was out there drinking a beer, there would be people who would stumble. I'm not going to do that. I'm not about to make somebody else stumble. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. What about somebody who's a gambler? You going to talk about the lottery? Or are you going to talk about going to the casino? No. Here's one that not many of us think about. What about somebody who's trying to lose weight? Are we really going to sit there and eat a triple layer chocolate cake in front of them?
Oh my gosh.
That is torture. That is wrong. That is torture. What about people? Dude, you can be addicted to food just as like you can be addicted to anything else. Food is very addictive. It is very possible. Are you really going to sit there and tempt them? Here's the idea. It's not about, this is not about alcohol. This is not about gambling. This is not about food. This is not about whether to eat meat or not eat meat. This is about living in an attitude of sacrifice and submission to other people. That's what this is about. Because that's exactly what Jesus did. He was not afraid. He was not afraid to call out the Pharisees when it was necessary. Was not afraid to. But he also submitted to the judgment of mankind when they put him on trial and put him to the cross. This is not about personal morality. It's that we as humans have known the truth and choose to believe a lie. Romans 1 talks straight about that. We have known God. Things that God has been evident and clearly seen through the creation that he has created. We are without excuse. We know the truth and we choose to believe the lie instead. Or the the lie, but it's like multifaceted lies of our culture that wrap us up. This is about spiritual growth, not learning a behavior modification. If we did that, we follow the law. Like, really? It's not about behavior modification. This is spiritual growth should be it should be taking you to an ancient faith and a simple believing what the Lord has said. Is what God says true or is it not? It is that simple. Either what he says is true or it's not. There is no middle ground. There is no right in the fence. Either it's true or it's not. There is no other choice. And that's the choice that is before us. The big idea is straight from Scripture. 1 Corinthians 10:33b. Not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many so that they may be saved. That's what this is about. This is about sacrifice to see people saved. Get them saved. We'll worry about spiritual growth later. Because we'll press on to maturity. But the priority, especially in these last days, the priority is to get people saved. Save as many as you can. Because that's all we can do. That's all we can do is save as many as we can. Where are you at this morning? We talk about sacrifice and submission this morning. To next week, we are going to couple this. We are going to probably go to one of the most popular verses for weddings on the face of the planet, 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to couple sacrifice with love. And I'm going to make the case. That it's not just love, but giving. That we're going to couple together these ideas. And it's the idea of sacrificial giving that what Christ was about. We'll make that case. Where are you at this morning? What do you need? Where are you at on these things? Do you have some pride that's slipping up in there that I'm right, everybody else is wrong? Golly, I know that slips in with me. Live in an attitude of sacrifice. If you're having struggles with that, I urge you to come forward with for prayer. If you need to give your life to Christ or rededicate your life, no matter what it is that you need, He is here. He is waiting.